I am Dr. Janet Beagle. I'm the Senior Director of Graduate Programs here at Purdue University in our College of Engineering. And I am going to be talking to you today about graduate school funding. So let me jump in to my presentation and get started here. Hopefully you can see the presentation slide now. Let me know if you are not seeing that, and I can adjust my screens here. And I know sometimes as I go through the slide deck, there's a little bit of a delay between when I click my button and when you actually see it on your end. All right, great. You guys can see it. Very good. That means that I'm set up technologically. So we'll get started here. All right, so last time I'll say this, but just for those of you that have just jumped in and joined us, I am Dr. Janet Beagle. I'm the Senior Director of Graduate Programs here at Purdue University College of Engineering. So really excited that so many of you joined. Think we're gonna have a good time talking through these topics. Feel free to use that Q&A to put in any questions you have, and I will address as many as I can when I get towards the end of the presentation. But what I'm going to be talking about today is this big topic of funding for graduate school. I'm going to run through kind of how that process works, who gets funded, how the funding process works, the types of funding, and some tips for finding funding, and how do you evaluate funding offers when you get them. So just a good introduction, hopefully, to this topic for all of you. As I kind of jump into that, just to give you an idea of physically where I am located, I am at Purdue University. We're located about 2 hours south of Chicago, Illinois, and about an hour north of Indianapolis, Indiana. So you can kind of see where within the United States we reside here. Small community, but Purdue University is a fairly large university. We have about 46,000 students total on campus. And about 10,000 of those are graduate students. And by far the largest college at our university is our College of Engineering. So we have about 3,900 engineering graduate students at Purdue. And the photo that you see on the screen there is actually an aerial shot of one of our engineering sections of campus. So that's known as Engineering Mall. Most of those brick buildings that you see around there are some of our different buildings that house our engineering classrooms and some of our laboratories. And then the photo in the lower right-hand corner is part of our Discovery Park, which is an innovation center where a lot of our engineering graduate students and faculty work as well. We have a lot of different types of engineering at Purdue. One of the photos down there is of our Burke Nanotechnology Center. And it has one of the cleanest clean rooms of any academic university in the world. So one of the things that we're very proud of. So that's just to give you a brief idea of what the physical location looks like here at Purdue as I jump into this topic. So the big takeaway that I want you to leave with today is that there is funding available for graduate school. And this is something that some students don't realize as they're getting ready to apply to graduate school. It looks very different than what you may have experienced as an undergraduate student. So here at Purdue, about 70% of our full-time graduate students receive funding. And I'm going to talk through this a little bit of how that money gets distributed, because it does depend a little bit on the type of degree that you are pursuing. So as we think about who gets this funding as a graduate student coming in, the top funded students are our PhD students, and they have the most types of funding options open up to them as well. And I'm gonna, in the future slides, go through and define what some of these different things are. But PhD students in general are going to be funded, especially within engineering. And they can receive fellowships. They can also receive all different types of assistantships where they're doing either research, teaching, or what we call a general graduate assistantship. The next population of students that gets funded is master's thesis students. And so a thesis master's student is someone who is doing research as opposed to just taking classes. And these students, because they're doing research, have a lot of the same opportunities open to them as the PhD students. So they will also have some fellowship opportunities as well as research assistantships, teaching assistantships, and these general graduate assistantships. In general, if you look at our percentages, I mentioned early on, 70% of our graduate students are funded. Close to 100% of our PhD students will be funded, and then about 50% of our master's students will be funded. And the reason for this, if you think about it from an employment standpoint, is when faculty members are hiring graduate students into their labs, They are going to be most interested in those PhD students because PhD students are here for a longer period of time. They tend to have more experience. And because they're here longer, faculty members can spend more time training them and getting them used to doing the type of research they have, and then have those students working with them for several years, as opposed to a master's student who's coming in just for a couple of years. And by the time the faculty member has them trained, the student is getting ready to graduate. So from a strictly practical standpoint, faculty members are often very interested in working with those PhD students. So the next category of students that gets funded here are these master's non-thesis students. And these are students that are not doing research, but are just taking classes and maybe doing kind of a project-based degree. And so within here, there tends to not be any fellowships. There's also not that research assistantship because these students are not doing research. So it's less likely that you're going to be funded on that RA. There are still some opportunities where you might be able to do some teaching or have a graduate assistantship, but more of these non-thesis master's students are either going to be employer funded. So these are people that are working full-time and their employer is helping to fund them, or they are self-funded, which means that they're just paying the tuition themselves. And then the last category that's down here are what we call professional masters. And these are a special category of non-thesis masters. These are students that are not doing research, but they are taking, in addition to the engineering coursework, they are taking classes of what we call the professional type. So they may be taking management classes, classes that you might take as an MBA. They take a lot of like regulatory or other types of courses like that. And the idea of these degrees is to prepare you for a very specific profession. And these are often accelerated programs. Some of them are completed in as little as a year. Some of them take 2 years, but they have a built-in internship or co-op opportunity in there as well. And because these are on more that industry track, they tend to be a more accelerated track, and they're very geared towards these very niche markets. These tend to not have funding associated with them. So most of these will either be working and their employer may have some benefits, but the majority of these students will actually pay for the degree themselves, recognizing that they get through the program quickly, and when they get out, they're going to be earning that much more money because of the credential that they now have. So certainly graduate school funding is not the same across the board, and that's one of the things that I want to emphasize here, is that there are these different types of degrees, and the opportunities that are going to be open to you are going to vary depending on the type of degree that you are thinking about pursuing. So as I talk a little bit more about the funding process, I do want to mention that you'll be automatically considered for some funding when you apply to graduate school. So a lot of these funding opportunities do not have a separate application, although there are some exceptions. But in general, when you apply to graduate school, there will be a place on the application that will ask, do you want to be considered for funding? And you check yes in that box, and then you become part of this pool that's going to be evaluated for this. So the way this typically works is we have all of the applications come into Purdue, faculty members are reviewing those applications, and they decide, okay, this is the pool of students that's going to be admitted. And then out of that admitted pool, the top students are going to be offered fellowships. So those that really shine in that application for their graduate program. The next pool then are going to be offered those assistantships, whether that's a research assistantship or teaching assistantship. And again, I'm going to talk more about those in just a minute. And that is by far the largest source of funding. So roughly, I mentioned again, that 70% number. Out of that 70%, about 4% of our students are on fellowships and about 66% are on assistantships. So assistantships are by far the most common way that you would get your graduate school funding. And then of course you have this population at the bottom then that is unfunded. So these are those individuals that are going to either be relying on some type of external funding or paying for it themselves. And as I mentioned, the PhD students are those that are going to be funded first when it comes to these different types of funding. You can also apply directly for external fellowships, and I'm going to talk more about that in just a minute. And then the other category is once you're already a graduate student. So I talked about the process when you just apply and are automatically considered, but once you're already a graduate student, sometimes there are also additional opportunities that open up that you can apply for. And a lot of these are these administrative assistantships. All right, so I've already kind of thrown these terms around. Let me go ahead and define them for you. These different types of graduate assistantships. The most common is a research assistantship. And this is, as the name implies, you're going to be doing research part-time, working with a faculty member and helping them with their research. A teaching assistantship is when you're going to be assisting a professor with their class. You may be actually helping with some of the teaching. You may be helping set up labs if it's a lab course, or holding office hours and helping the students with homework or with questions that they have. You may be helping to prepare some of the lectures, gathering information, putting together presentations and things like that for the faculty member, but just assisting with anything related to that teaching. And then the last category is used a couple of different terms here, either administrative professional or sometimes just a plain graduate assistantship, abbreviated AP or GA. And these are graduate assistants that work in more administrative roles, so offices around the university. So for example, I work in the College of Engineering in an administrative role. We have a graduate assistant who I hired that helps us maintain one of our graduate student databases. He has some programming language experience, and so he helps maintain the database on the back end. When there's updates that need to be made, he handles all of our import and export processes. And he's a graduate student that has that experience. I hired him then to do this particular job in our office. It's not necessarily research, it's not connected to the teaching, but it's more this administrative type position. And those are the types of positions that you often don't see until you are already a graduate student. And those positions you typically do have to apply for. So when I have that position open up, I send out a posting through our email list, and then different graduate students will submit their resumes and apply for that position. So when you have a graduate assistantship, as I mentioned, this is part-time employment, and some of the terminology that you'll see is half-time, which would mean you're working 20 hours per week, or quarter time, which means that you're working 10 hours a week. If you think about a full-time job as 40 hours per week, then that's where these terms come from. And so when you're on an assistantship, you're working part-time, either doing that research, that teaching, or that administrative work. And then in return, you receive free tuition. So you're not paying any tuition to the university, as well as a paycheck. And you may also get some other benefits. Sometimes these positions will come with health insurance. Sometimes they have paid vacation. Sometimes they'll have spousal tuition benefits. So you can get a reduced tuition for your spouse. So often, because these are employment, they come with different types of employment benefits. As I mentioned before, you'll typically be considered for these positions as part of admission. So when you submit your application to the graduate school, that same application is what's going to be used to determine whether or not you get offered an assistantship. But there are some that will have a separate application. I mentioned, the example of my GA that I hire. There's also some departments that will have a separate application for their teaching assistants. And so that's something to pay attention to. Whatever program you're applying to, make sure you're reading through their website, finding out what their funding process is, if they do have a separate application for things like teaching assistantships. The other tip I will mention there is looking at funding outside of your home department, and teaching assistants are a very common example of this, especially within our College of Engineering. A lot of engineers obviously have a very strong math background, and mathematics is a department that hires a lot of teaching assistants because they are basic undergrad classes. They have a lot of classes and a lot of undergrads that they need to teach. And so many of our engineering students will apply for a teaching assistantship appointment in the Department of Mathematics. Those of you that speak other languages apart from English, we have our languages and cultures department, and they will often hire TAs that specialize in the language that they're teaching for those classes that are teaching these other languages. And so there are opportunities like that I would encourage you to keep an eye out for. And as you're applying to a university, inquire about those other opportunities that are outside of your immediate department as well. So that gives you a couple of different opportunities. One, when you apply to your graduate program, you're going to be considered for some of that in-house, that departmental funding, but then also look for those other opportunities outside your department, whether that's a teaching assistantship or some type of graduate assistantship in an office or things like that. The assistantships can be awarded in a couple of different ways. So they can either be what we call fiscal year or a full year or a 12-month appointment. And with those appointments, you are working, as the name implies, 12 months out of the year. You don't necessarily get summers off, and you are being paid for that full 12 months as well. They can also be awarded for an academic year. So here at Purdue, our academic year runs from August until May. And so it's an approximately 9-month appointment. That's most common for teaching assistantships, but there are other types of appointments that will do that as well. And they can also be awarded by the semester or by the quarter if you're at a university that uses the quarter system. And again, that's very common for teaching assistantships, where you're assigned to a particular class for one semester. And then once that semester is up, then hopefully you're able to secure another teaching assistantship for the next semester. So I already mentioned, one tip to pay attention to some of those outside opportunities. Another tip that I'll mention is to contact faculty who are doing research in your area of interest. So do not be afraid to email faculty once you have applied to a university. Particularly if you are doing a research degree. So if you are doing a PhD or a thesis master's where you want to do research, identify those faculty members who are doing research in that area. Let them know that you applied, let them know that you're interested in the work that they're doing, and attach a resume to that email as well when you send it. So the way the funding process works, the faculty are the ones that will actually be doing the hiring when it comes to these research assistantships, is what I'm talking about specifically here. And the way that works is the faculty members will submit grant proposals in order to receive research funds. So they'll have these ideas that they submit to either government agencies, corporations, nonprofit organizations. Basically, these entities are out there saying, we have some kind of problem that we want to solve. It could be a manufacturing problem and they need somebody to come in and help them solve this particular thing. It could be some of these larger global issues that some of our federal government is trying to tackle. And so they put out these calls and say, hey, we're looking for some experts to come in and help us address this issue that we're having. And so faculty members that have expertise in that area submit a grant proposal and say, hey, this is what I have to offer. I've got this much experience. This is the type of lab I run. This is my proposal as to how I would study this issue and try to come up with a solution. And then if those entities like the idea, then they provide funding back to the faculty member. So then that faculty member has promised, I'm going to do all of this research. I'm going to help you solve this problem. And so then they in turn take that money and hire you as a graduate student to help them actually do that research. And so those faculty members then will be looking to hire individuals that are interested in this type of research, want to work in this area and really address these problems. I think this is one of the most exciting things about graduate school that we don't often think about, at least I wasn't aware of it back when I was an undergrad, is when you're a graduate student, you're working on these real world problems and just involved in this type of structure, right? Where you're helping to support these big questions that these entities out there are trying to solve. So then to shift gears a little bit, let's talk a little bit about fellowships. So these are very similar to an undergraduate scholarship. Sometimes the term scholarship is used interchangeably, although often a fellowship is intended to be a larger package. These are very prestigious, so it's something that if you are able to secure, it's a very good thing to be able to have on your resume, in addition to the financial benefit that it offers. The eligibility, the benefits, the requirements can really vary widely. So you have to really pay attention to what is being offered and what the requirements are. And they can be internal or external. And what I mean by that is internal means that it's from the university itself. So here at Purdue, we have some fellowships that we offer to our students, and it's funding that the university has. They can also be external, which means that it's outside of the university, and you can take those fellowships any place. So typically you would apply to a nonprofit or a professional organization, offer these fellowships. And then when you receive that money, you can take it to whatever university you want. Often when people talk about fellowships, they're referring to what I would call a full fellowship. And that's kind of that whole package that I'm talking about. So these will typically include tuition as well as a stipend. So again, a paycheck that you would receive. They may have health insurance and they may have additional benefits. Sometimes they'll have a small research stipend, so money to go towards your research program, or money for equipment or for textbooks, or to be able to travel to conferences to present your results. So a lot of different benefits can be included in these fellowships. Some people will also use the term fellowship for what I would call a smaller, more of a partial fellowship. And these come in a lot of different formats. A really common one is a travel grant. Sometimes you'll see people talk about travel grants or travel fellowships. And these are funds to help you go to a conference and present your research. Very, very good things to apply for and to get. But you're looking at, anywhere from like $500 to a couple $1,000, as opposed to a full fellowship that's going to include kind of this full package with your tuition and everything else. Generally, you cannot hold more than one fellowship at a time, but you may be able to use them in sequence. So this is something that we see with some of our outstanding students, where you're admitted to Purdue, you're offered a Purdue fellowship, and then perhaps you also receive an external fellowship, such as the National Science Foundation Fellowship. You can't use both of those fellowships at the same time, but what you can do is use, for example, the National Science Foundation Fellowship first. That's a 3-year fellowship. So use that for the first 3 years and defer the Purdue fellowship. Once the National Science Foundation Fellowship has ended, then you can start the Purdue fellowship. And so you can use them in sequence. And so if you are fortunate enough and competitive enough to be one of these individuals that receives multiple fellowships, then you can essentially pay for your entire PhD or other graduate career with these fellowships. Most fellowships are available in the fall. And so if you are someone who is graduating in kind of an off cycle, like a December graduation, and looking at doing a January start time, just be aware of this and know that any external applications, they're going to be for a fall start, most likely. And that also means that the application process is typically about a year out. So you're going to be applying for these in the fall as well. Another tip I have here is, when you apply to any university, complete any of the optional essays on the application, because often they're optional in the sense that they are not required for admission, but they may be required for funding. We have an example of that here at Purdue. We have a diversity essay that is optional. It's not required for admission. You don't need to fill it out to be admitted to your program, but we have certain fellowships that use that essay as part of their requirements. And so if you don't complete that essay, you're still considered for admission, you're still considered for other types of funding, but you miss out on that particular opportunity. You will not be considered for that fellowship. So pay attention to that when you're applying, and complete any optional essays that you can, because often it may be optional for admission, but it may be helpful for funding. So I've talked a little bit about external fellowships, but just a little bit more detail here. These are fellowships that you would apply for directly. And these are often from governments, nonprofit, or professional organizations. As I mentioned before, all of these specifications can really vary very widely. And so you do want to pay attention to what the requirements are, what the expectations are. They can be full or partial fellowships. So you always want to read the fine print and understand, what is this that I'm applying for? Is this something more like a travel grant? Or is this something more like a full fellowship that's going to fund my entire education? They may also have work or other requirements as part of the fellowship. Those can be really beneficial sometimes to help expand your network and to get that additional work experience while you're being paid to pursue your graduate education. But just be aware that some of them do have that. And if it's something that you're not interested in, then you don't want to commit to that. And you want to be applying for external fellowships about 1 year before you plan to start graduate school. A lot of those application deadlines are in the fall, so in that October timeframe. And so right now is the time to start looking for those fellowships if you're someone who's going to be starting graduate school next year. So some tips for finding funding. Certainly understanding your program's funding process. So I'm giving you some real generalities here, but make sure that whatever program you apply to, that you really understand what their particular funding process is. It's okay to ask. It's okay to reach out to the graduate administrator or the faculty advisor in the program that you're applying to and ask them what is their process and what are their expectations. Make sure before you do that you have thoroughly read their website and any other information that they have. They will not be happy if they have to answer a question that is very clearly on their website. But if you've read the website and you still don't completely understand or you have follow-up questions, definitely feel free to reach out to programs. And then consider what makes sense for your situation. Everybody's going to be different. The type of degree that you're applying to is going to provide different opportunities for you, what your career objectives are, and your own financial situation, whether you're already working and have some employer benefits, whether you're coming directly from an undergraduate position. You have to just consider what makes sense for you and for your career track and where you want to go. Use Google, look up your options, and then also review the list that I'm going to provide here that has some different fellowships that are available. Reach out to faculty before, during, and after applying. And I mentioned a couple of these tips before, but you do really want to keep those emails very short and professional, research focused. I typically say you can reach out to a faculty member a couple of times, email them once. If you don't hear anything, it's okay to send a follow-up. Faculty members are extremely busy. Sometimes they just miss it. It gets buried in their inbox. It's okay to follow up a second time. If it's somebody you're really interested in working with and you still don't hear, I think the third time is okay. After that, I would just kind of wait or reach out to some other faculty members. And then make sure you attach your resume as part of that as well. On your application, there will be a place where you can mention the faculty that you're interested in working with. Typically, there's space to list like 3 to 5 faculty members. So again, do your homework before you apply. Make sure you list that on the application because that is used for both admission as well as funding. And so often the faculty member that you are doing your research with is going to be the same faculty member that is providing your funding. So those two things often go together. A couple of Purdue fellowship opportunities that I want to mention here, the Purdue Doctoral Fellowship. This is one of our largest fellowships at Purdue. And for this one, there is a requirement that you've graduated from a US high school. And this is one that I mentioned, those optional essays. You have to submit that diversity essay as part of the application to Purdue. And anybody that's on the webinar tonight here that's from Purdue, if you're doing a Purdue undergrad, then make sure you're aware of the Chappell Fellowship because this is a fellowship specifically for Purdue undergraduate students that are continuing their grad study at Purdue. And this is one you do have to apply for. This is not one that you're considered for as part of admission. There is a separate application. And I believe it's around January is when that is due. So make sure you're looking that up and getting the information ready for that as well. And then for some external fellowship opportunities, for underrepresented minority students, the GEM Fellowship can be a really great fellowship. If you check that out, if that's a category that makes sense for you. This is a fellowship that is a partnership between some different industry partners as well as universities. And so this is one that if you're interested in going more of an industry track, you can gain some really good internship experience as part of this fellowship. The NSF, or the National Science Foundation Fellowship, this is limited to US citizens and permanent residents, but this is one of the most prestigious national awards. So this is definitely one, if you're someone who has done any undergraduate research and are interested in going on for a research master's or PhD, definitely take a look at this one. It's one of the top awards out there. I think it's a $34,000 salary that you get each year on top of several other benefits that they have. For any of the international students on the call, Education USA, if you're not familiar with that organization, definitely check them out. They are a great organization, have a lot of different resources and information, and they'll be able to point you to different options that you may have as an international student as well. And then there's some additional opportunities. I'll put this link in the chat as well once I finish the presentation here. But if you go out to our website, we do have a list of fellowships out there that are sortable, and you can see if there's something there that is applicable for you. So let's say you've gone through the process, you're starting to get some funding offers in. How do you kind of evaluate them and see what makes the most sense? One thing that you do want to consider is the cost of living for the area that you're planning on going to. This is one advantage that we have at Purdue, is because we are in a very low cost of living, very safe community that we have here. And so the amount of funding that you receive from Purdue is going to go a lot further in a place like West Lafayette, Indiana, which is where we're located, compared to some of the larger cities, especially some of the larger cities on either coast. So this is something to pay attention to when you receive those multiple offers. Consider, okay, I've received X from this university. How much is it going to actually cost me to rent a place, my housing costs, my food costs, transportation costs, all of that? How much is that going to cost compared to this university? Because sometimes you may think you're getting a lower offer from one university, but if the cost of living is less, you may actually be better off with that offer. So make sure you're paying attention to cost of living as you're looking at this. The other really important point here is to make sure you understand the whole package and what the funding is actually offering, because different universities will word things differently and sometimes cover things in a different way. Just one broad example, some universities will give you a flat dollar amount, but then out of that, you have to pay tuition and all of these other fees. Other universities will say, we're going to cover your tuition, plus we're going to give you this much for living expenses. And so they kind of splice it out. So make sure you understand what the offer is actually covering. Another kind of tricky thing to pay attention in there is this idea of tuition and fees. And so Purdue is a good example here where we do have tuition and fees. Some universities lump these together, some universities keep them separate. Here at Purdue, they are separate. And so our funding offers will typically cover tuition, but often students are responsible to cover some of the student fees. In the College of Engineering, it's about $1,000 a semester for the various fees that you have to do. And so you won't be paying tuition, but you do have about $1,000 a semester that you're paying. So that's something to pay attention to as well. And then again, how much is the stipend or the salary? How much is that living expense money that you're getting? How is it paid? Do you get it biweekly? Do you get it monthly? Just to kind of understand that. And then what are the expenses that you have to take out of this? So again, going back to that example, do they give you a flat sum and then out of that you have to pay tuition? Or is the money you're getting truly your money? And then make sure you're paying attention to any requirements. What are the work requirements? A lot of the assistantships, again, are going to have either a 20-hour or a 10-hour a week requirement. Some fellowships, even though fellowships are often considered scholarships or free money, a lot of them will have work requirements as well. Sometimes fellowships are what we call administered as assistantships. And so while it's fellowship money, there's still an expectation that you're helping with research or doing things like that. And then, of course, a lot of external fellowships may have other expectations. Either they may have internship requirements or expectations that after you've received your degree, you will work in a certain industry for a certain amount of time. So just make sure you're aware of whatever the requirements are in whatever offer you have. And I mentioned this, but it's definitely okay to ask questions. Feel free to email the faculty member or the graduate administrator and make sure you're getting your questions answered. And finally, the last tip I'll make here, funding is important. It absolutely is. You need to have enough to live on, whether that is your own savings or loans or money that you're getting, or whether it's the funding offer that you're getting from the university. So it definitely is an important part of your graduate experience, but it definitely is not everything. And so if you have a couple of funding offers that are relatively close, you could live off of them, that they're both a functional offer, then make sure you're looking at all other aspects, because so much of that graduate school experience is going to be more than the dollar amount. It's going to be your relationship with your major professor. That's probably one of the most important pieces, your relationship. And part of that graduate school process is being mentored by that graduate faculty member. How well do you fit with the program? How excited are you about what you're going to be studying and the research that you're going to be doing? The location where the university is, do you feel safe there? Do you feel comfortable there? There are so many other factors that go into making a graduate school decision that, definitely funding is a piece of that, but don't get so focused on funding that you lose sight of some of these other really important factors as well. So a couple of things that I want to mention, and then I'm going to jump into the Q&A and see what questions you've asked. So if you are interested in learning more about Purdue, and I'll put this in the chat as well, but if you go out to our grad programs website, this gives a listing of our various schools. We've got 14 schools and divisions of engineering across our college. So you can see what offerings they have, explore their websites, see what they're doing. And I don't think I mentioned this before, but if you're not familiar with Purdue, we are the #2 engineering grad program among all US public universities. So that's something that we're very proud of. We have a lot of really exciting stuff happening here at Purdue. And then one event that I definitely want to encourage all of you to attend. So this is an online event. It's going to be held October 3rd and 4th. That's when we're going to have our live sessions. We're going to have some online workshops. We're going to have some networking. We'll have also some on-demand video content as well. We'll have various faculty members that are profiling their research. We're going to have some research panels where they talk about what they're doing. We've got some folks from our International Students and Scholars Office that are going to come and talk about admissions for international students, the visa processing, as well as career planning as an international student, and things you need to be aware of when it comes to OPT and CPT and things like that. So there's going to be a lot of great information here. So definitely check this out. It's free to come. It's a free registration. And also anybody who participates in the event will get an application fee waiver, so you can actually apply to Purdue for free. So really want to highlight this event. This is an excellent opportunity for you to come and learn more about Purdue engineering, receive an application fee waiver for if you decide that you do want to apply, and just take advantage of that really, really good opportunity. So I'll put that link in the chat as well. But if you just Google Purdue Engineering Grad Showcase, then it should come up for you as well. And you can register now.